Hello, everybody, and welcome to a live lecture from Lexington, Kentucky. I'm here at Henry Clay High School. Many thanks to Miss Beeler's class for hosting me, for a few of these kids coming during their Christmas break, for providing me with some video equipment, and I'm very happy to be here, delivering a live lecture that a lot of people have been asking for. The Stuarts, the English Civil War, the Glorious Revolution. This is going to take a while. We're going to do this in a few different parts. But thankful for everybody that's here. And also the folks from Richmond, Kentucky. One of Mr. Osborne's students is here and Mr. Chapman is here personally. Thank y'all for coming. So let's go ahead and start with Stuart Absolutism in the English Civil War. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the groundwork and talk a bit about James I. So first of all, we need to be familiar with the Stuarts. Now, these are some pretty easy monarchs to remember as long as you've got some kind of formula. Now, there are hamburger formulas, there are finger formulas where somebody says, okay, 5 fingers, then Cromwell's the middle finger, that sort of thing. Now, typically, I tend to be a little bit more basic, and I just think about it as kind of a mirror image, that you've got J1, C1, C2, J2. And if you think about it like a mirror or something like that, if any of you have seen The Last Jedi already, you can kind of have like sort of a picture of what that sort of thing looks like, looking out from a mirror. But the C's are right there, and then you go out to the J's. So James I, Charles I, then you've got the interregnum, Charles II, and then James II. And the first part of this, James I and Charles I, this is the period of Stuart Absolutism. So this is where the monarchs are trying to implement absolutism in England. Then you've got the interregnum, then you've got the restoration of the monarchy. And there's not the same kind of absolutism that's exercised, but, there is still some tension between the monarch and the parliament. And so the central issues that are at play here are the taxing authority. Who has the power to tax in England? Then the state religion. Who has, do we have to worship at the same church? Do we have to, all pay taxes to support a religion? Are we all going to be required to profess that religion? And then the third part is, where does sovereignty lie? Remember that absolutism is about sovereignty lying in the hands of the monarch and not in the hands of the representative bodies or the people. So Louis XIV and Peter the Great and the Fredericks in Prussia, they successfully either challenged or co-opted the nobility, the representative bodies, and all of these other groups. Now, in Britain, this was tried, but it ultimately failed. And that's really what makes Britain different. Now, also, at the end of this, Britain's actually going to have a strong central government, even though when you look at other places where absolutism failed, like the Dutch Republic and Poland, for example, the Holy Roman Empire, those became failed states. And so, that's really kind of the miracle here. And so the British are going to be able to show that you can have a strong central government and have it based on a representative body rather than a monarch. And when you look at European states today, you have government by representative bodies. So this is a very big deal. Now, to make this, as simple as we can, 2 words, both starting with P: Protestantism and Parliament. And if you think about those, all of the conflicts are rooted in one of these things: Protestantism and or Parliament. Now, when we talk about Protestantism, one thing that is important to note is that you've really got 2 conflicts. First of all, you've got Protestants versus Catholics, and then you've got Protestants versus Protestants. You have the Church of England Protestants, and then you have the Calvinist Protestants, who are dissenting Protestants, people who don't like the Church of England, who think that it's too Catholic. So you have a lot of different religious factions. So it's not just as simple as Protestants versus Catholics. We also have conflicts within Protestantism that will really be the basis for the English Civil War, whereas Protestants versus Catholics, more about the Glorious Revolution. So let's go ahead and start with James I, who was James I of England, but also James VI of Scotland. When Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, the King of Scotland, James VI, actually had the best blood title to the throne. And so he was invited to be James I of England, in addition to being James VI of Scotland. Now, this is before the crowns were combined later on. So he is not the King of Britain, he is the King of England, the King of Scotland, and he has different numbers after his name, depending on which title he's bearing. And James was a big advocate of divine right absolutism, the divine right of kings, which, you're all familiar with in some capacity, that basically God has appointed the king to rule, and God wants the king to rule without being held back by representative bodies and all of that other stuff. Now, when you think about building a strong state, it's kind of hard to do that when you've got all of these different groups that are competing for influence. I mean, you think about today and you look at how difficult it is for Congress to pass legislation, even when it's controlled by the same party and the presidents of the same party. Divine right absolutism is based in this idea that God has put the king where he is to rule absolutely in the best interest of the nation as a whole, and not just, taking sides with these different factions. And that's divine right. Now, if you've had U.S. history or you'll be taking U.S. history, yes, this is the same James that was the king when the Jamestown colony was founded in 1607. And one thing to note about this is the British had a different kind of model for colonization, that instead of the crown, really kind of supervising, the government directly supervising colonies like with the French, you have private investment. The Virginia Company was created in order to settle this Virginia colony. So little bit different of an approach they're taking. In spite of the absolutism at home, it's relatively unregulated, colonization, and really a business enterprise abroad. And another thing, if, of course, do we have anybody here that's seen V for Vendetta? I don't know if any, so we got a few of you. Remember the 5th of November, the guys in the cool shirts over there have seen it. And so as far as that goes, he's also the king during the Gunpowder Plot. This was a plot by Catholics, otherwise known as papists. You'll hear me use that term papist, which is their word for Catholic at the time. There's the plot to blow up Parliament while the king's there. So you blow up the king, you blow up Parliament. Of course, it was, it was uncovered, and the English still celebrate Guy Fawkes Day, which used to be a very anti-Catholic holiday. Now, of course, today it's kind of like July 4th. They shoot fireworks and stuff, but they don't necessarily know why they're shooting fireworks. But used to, they would actually, light an effigy on fire and all of that kind of stuff and celebrate the triumph of Protestantism in Britain over Catholicism. But it is still, November 5th, the 5th of November, as the Europeans say it, is still a celebrated holiday in the UK today. And so a state religion, okay? So when we talk about a state religion, we're talking about one church that not only does everybody have to attend, but also that is supported with taxes. And so what James decided, now if you go back to Elizabeth was trying to stem off controversy. She wanted to try to say, okay, well, the Church of England's going to be Protestant, but it's going to retain some certain Catholic elements, what they call the Elizabethan Settlement, that Elizabeth tried to limit controversy, but then it's kind of an example of, you try to please everybody and you're not going to please anybody. And so what you've got here is James just decides, you know what, I'm not trying to placate people. I am going to just proclaim that the Church of England is our state religion. Everybody will attend the Church of England. They will support the Church of England with taxes. And this causes some problems, of course, as I mentioned, the conflicts within Protestantism, because James is insistent on this idea of religious uniformity, that everybody will go to the king's church and will support the king's church with taxes, and no other religious groups, even other Protestant Christian religious groups, are going to be allowed. And so again, this King James, he's around for a lot of stuff because he's also the King James Bible guy. So, which another thing here to note, even though we call it the King James Version, now younger generations don't tend to put as much emphasis on this, but there are some older people that still view the King James Bible as the real Bible. That's like, if it's not the King's English, it's not the real Bible. Y'all know anybody who thinks like that? I mean, we are in Kentucky, right? I mean, there's some old time religion around here, right? So, this Bible, now, why is it that people put so much emphasis on it? And the thing is that this was at the time called the authorized version. So I think there's a tendency to think, okay, well, the Bible can be translated into English. It's a free-for-all, right? No. This is the only English translation that is authorized. So if you are in possession of a Bible that you translated in your basement or something like that, or, Michael Board the party over there, translate a Bible and just started passing it around on the internet, which they didn't have back then, but still, that you could get arrested. Like, that was an unauthorized version. And what's important here is that on one hand, I think that there's some value to this, because who's to say that a Bible is legitimate, right? And that's the thing, that this Bible has the King's seal of approval. You know that this was translated by professionals, that not just anybody put this together. So I could see some utility in this when you think about it like that. But also what's important here is when you think about, this Bible, when there are some executive decisions made during translation, it is going to use the language of the Church of England. So, for example, the Greek word baptize, it means immerse. But instead of translating that, well, we'll just transliterate it. We'll just use baptize. Why? Because the Church of England does not immerse. So you just say baptize rather than immerse. So all kinds of little decisions like that going into it. Now, of course, kind of the irony is they relied heavily on William Tyndale's Bible, who was an English Protestant who made an unauthorized translation of the Bible, but it was really good. So like Let There Be Light, that was out of William Tyndale's Bible, not the Bible that's being authorized by the King and the Church of England. So it's important to note here that, the value that some people place on the King James Bible goes back to this royal absolutism, that the king controls religion, and the king says, this is the Bible that you will read, and it's got the king's seal of approval. It's kind of like, when you buy something USDA organic or something like that. Can something be organic without having that stamp on it? Sure, but that's the government saying it's organic, and people think a little more of it because, hey, the government says it's organic. I don't have to take somebody's word for it. So, a little bit about the King James Bible. Now, it's a tragedy that these Snickers Feast commercials, y'all are probably too young to remember them, but they're still on the internet. They were made in 2007, right before like HD, everything was in HD a few years after that. So they're still in like standard definition, but it's a really, funny series. Do you remember those? Yeah. I mean, they were really funny because they have Henry VIII, they've got a Hawaiian guy, a Greek guy, a Viking, and then you've got this guy in the middle who's all dressed like a pilgrim. He looks funny. He's always the butt of the joke. Like there's one of them where the Viking asks, he's driving the car. They're basically on a road trip together, and the Viking's driving the car, and he's like, does everybody have their seat buckled? And everybody's like, yeah, I got my seat buckled. And then he says, does everybody have their hat buckled? And then it's like, ah, ha, 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 ha. And, they always like say something at his expense. So this guy, it's like, he's the butt of the joke. He's different. He's not like the other people. And you think about it, how many of y'all dressed up like pilgrims when y'all were little? Did that happen like at school or something like that? Some of you might have dressed up as Indians, but you see those pilgrims and it's like, they're funny looking, right? I mean, they wear weird clothes, and really that's part of the reason they came to America, because the English were like, look, you're a little bit too weird for us. Get out of here. But these people, I mean, they wore these distinctive clothes as part of their religion. Of course, when you're little, you're taught they came over for religious freedom. And then later you take AP US history, you realize, oh, wait, actually they were religious zealots and, weren't very tolerant and were really strict in their religion and weren't really freedom people and didn't have much of a sense of humor either. But, it's just, they're weird people I think anywhere, but especially in England at this time. You had these English Calvinists, all right? Now, remember that, what's interesting about the English Reformation is we could go on about to what extent was the English Reformation really Protestant? There are some, like timelines of Christianity where you see, the Catholic Church, and then you see Protestantism, and then Anglicanism as a separate branch. Because remember, Henry VIII, he was really seceding from the Catholic Church. He wasn't trying to change a whole lot. So a lot of the forms of Catholicism were actually kept during the English Reformation. Now, John Calvin, really on the more radical side, started from scratch, like, let me write this book, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, and, let me start over and have this philosophy based on the sovereignty of God and predestination. Let's take all of the icons out of the churches, all of these graven images, so to speak. Let's get rid of them and let's whitewash everything and start from scratch. And let's not wear, colorful clothing or anything like that, or show off wealth, or, have, cockfights and stuff like that, or any kind of sinful living. Let's get rid of that. So these are very, very Protestant people, okay? Now, these two groups of English Calvinists are known as Puritans and Separatists, and they believe that the Church of England was too Catholic. I thought we were having a Reformation here, and meanwhile, they're not seeing much of a Reformation. So it's important to note that with Puritans and Separatists, they have the same doctrine, okay? They believe the same things, but there are two different approaches here. So I like water. Of course, I drink tea and that sort of thing. When I'm not drinking tea, I'm usually drinking water. Of course, y'all just mainly drink whiskey here in Kentucky, right? Not so much for you young people. Bourbon, that's right. Okay, so specifically bourbon, he says. So probably 16, 17 years old there. But anyway, so Kentucky bourbon, but that's got water in it somewhere, right? So when we think about water, okay, there is tap water. Okay, which I tell you, the Lexington tap water isn't that bad. Like, there are some places, that it's awful. I was in New Orleans last week, and it's terrible. No offense to New Orleans, I love the place, but the tap water is awful. I mean, the water here, of course, that's why they've got all the bourbon here, because of the limestone water, the water's good, all of that. So the water out of the tap, that's the way I think about somebody who was an Anglican, a member of the Church of England. It's like, the church is fine the way it is. Just turn on the tap, drink the water. The government says it won't kill you, right? I mean, that's the thing. Of course, they say, oh yeah, tap water, you can drink that. And then it's like, I don't know. Why is it? But anyway, but the Calvinists, they're like, what? We don't like this Church of England. And again, this is all within Protestantism. We're not talking about Catholics here or anything like that. So when you look at the Calvinists, these dissenters, the Puritans, of course, this is a good thing about studying like England and France and all that. It's like, what's a Huguenot? In France, we got to call these people Huguenots. But here we can call them Puritans and Separatists, because the Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England. And the Separatists wanted to separate from the Church of England. Now, both strategies, I guess, have their merit, but at the same time, we were talking about those churches that just use the King James Bible. What if somebody were to go into that church and say, hey, why don't we use a more modern translation? This is the 21st century. How do you think that King James church would react? It wouldn't be good, I can tell you that, right? I mean, they'd say, there's another church like down the road you can go to or something like that. Get out of here. Now, the Separatists, they're thinking, what, we're probably not going to do a lot to change the Church of England. That's an uphill battle, so let's just separate from the Church of England. But then again, what's the problem with that? James won't allow it, because he says everybody's going to attend the Church of England. So the Puritans are unable to purify the Church of England. The Separatists are unable to separate from the Church of England. Now, that's when some of them come to America, and that's why you're seeing, the Pilgrims were actually Separatists. They were Calvinists, but they were Separatists, and then they were joined by some Puritans at Massachusetts Bay. So some of them left, but others stayed, and that caused a problem later on for the Stuart monarchs. So, as far as the Puritans, they want to be a part of the Church of England. The Separatists, they want to be a part from the Church of England, if you want kind of a little jingle there. So, in the next segment, we will talk about Charles I and the English Civil War, now that we've laid the groundwork for that. So we're going to take a little break. We will be back shortly. Hopefully, those of you watching on YouTube will continue with us. See you in a bit.